We are trying to pack a lot into today, so thanks for your indulgence. Please do find a seat, start on your salad. Lunch will be served while the panel is going on. We're going to have a lively discussion today over lunch about the transition to 100% zero-emission vehicles and what that is going to look like. And I don't want to take up any more of that time, so without further ado, let me have you welcome our sponsor to do a quick introduction, CEO Paul Glenny of Hubject. Come on up. Where'd he go? Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. How great it is for me to be introducing this panel today, The Road to 100% Zero-Emission Vehicles. This has been my personal mission for the last decade, and this is something that I believe is a future worth striving for. It is impressive to witness the number of pledges, goals, and proclamations that have been made and continue to be made around the world supporting EV adoption. However, we all know it's the policies, the actions, and investments that are going to make the difference. That is what this panel is about, and that is what our company, Hubject, is about. We focus on the customer experience for EV drivers by simplifying charging and maximizing infrastructure investment. The Hubject e-roaming platform gives drivers the confidence and peace of mind to take their EVs wherever they want because they can easily access, find, and charge with reliable cross-network access. We currently connect over 100,000 charging ports across 4 continents. And our activities in China and the world beyond will double that number by the end of the year. Additionally, we've been leading in the development of Plug and Charge and ISO 15118, the latest innovation and effort to create the ultimate charging experience. The best part of this technology is that it not only makes EV charging incredibly easy, but it also enables several advanced energy management features that are critical to supporting the power needs to reach the worldwide EV adoption goals. These features include smart charging, inductive charging, V2G, and more. Today in the US, we see the transportation sector accounting for close to 30% of our greenhouse gas emissions, highest of any sector and just ahead of electricity generation. So it makes sense to tackle the largest contributor to climate change as we simultaneously decarbonize the energy sector. And there's a lot at stake as we continue these business as usual scenarios. Dirty air caused by particulate matter, SOx, and NOx further detract from the health of all citizens, but we are also impacting disadvantaged communities in greater amounts. On top of that, greenhouse gases are negatively impacting ecosystems of all kinds, ranging from coral reefs to our very own forests. There are a lot of reasons to pursue the goal of 100% zero-emission vehicles. Our future depends upon acting now. So perhaps the best part of introducing this panel is the underlying reason we're here, exploring ways to end climate change and creating a healthier future for all. Promoting zero-emission vehicles is a key component in reaching these goals, and this panel showcases the policies, efforts, and investments being implemented and pursued around the world to encourage EV adoption and driving. The future is now. The future is in this room. Now I'll turn the mic over to the host and moderator, Anthony Eggert, Director of Transportation at ClimateWorks. Thank you to the fourth, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Paul, and thanks to Hubject for the sponsorship of this session. I'm quite excited about the conversation we're about to have here. So we're your lunchtime entertainment, your aperitif, your digestif, maybe your seasoning, and we'll try to keep it lively, and we'll also give a chance for you to participate in this session if you have any questions through the app as part of the conference. When I heard Genevieve this morning had mentioned the fact that the Electric Vehicle Symposium has been running for 50 years, so 1969. That was actually before I was born. But it made me sort of reflect on the time that I've been involved in this area of clean transportation and just sort of the long road that we've traveled so far. But actually I'm curious, I want to get maybe just a sense of the room here, which is, how many people here have been working on electric vehicles, zero-emission vehicles for at least 10 years? Okay, that's pretty good. At least 20. I see a few more. Yeah, okay. At least 25. Okay, one of our panelists is still going. Okay, we'll hear a little bit more. So I haven't quite hit 25 yet. I'm working towards that. But I think, for a lot of that time, it has felt like a little bit like not just a long road, but like we're climbing a mountain. And I'm going to mix a few metaphors here, so forgive me. But my wife and I really enjoy hiking in the High Sierra. And if you're in the High Sierra in particular and you're hiking up some of these mountains, oftentimes you think you're about to reach the peak, and then you realize it's kind of a false summit, and it's just a little bit of a dip, and then you got to keep going. And so pretty much throughout my career, it has felt oftentimes like climbing a mountain to try to get to that future on the other side, which is a clean transportation system. And I actually think now I can say with some confidence that this is the first time, the era that we're in right now, the years that we're in right now, where we can actually see the peak. The clouds have parted. We can sort of see the path to the top. But the route still is going to require some effort, and there's potentially some speed bumps in the way. So we're going to have, I'll invite up here a little bit our itinerant explorers who are going to help us chart a path to that peak. But I just wanted to give a little bit of context. And Paul had mentioned the fact that there's now been these very bold pronouncements of ambition, and not just ambition, but also action. And I just want to kind of articulate a few of these to set the context. So 27 cities, including Seattle, which is we'll hear from a little bit later, Los Angeles, Mexico City, Milan, Paris, Quito, many others, have committed to converting 100% of their transit system to electrification by 2025, 100%, and to make a major portion of their cities emissions-free, fossil fuel-free by 2030. That doesn't include Portland. Is anybody here from Portland? We'll see if we can get them on the list. Also, 17 national and subnational jurisdictions, including Oregon in this case, which I guess just recently passed a very ambitious goal for zero-emission vehicles out of the legislature on the order of 50% by 2030, 90% by 2035. But not just Oregon, California, Norway, Netherlands, Germany, UK have basically committed to make all passenger vehicles, 100%, zero emission by mid-century or sooner. And some of those have targets that are quite a bit earlier than that. And of course, we can't leave out China, which is the largest market for electric vehicles. And of course, the largest market for vehicles overall, which saw over 1 million in sales last year. In fact, over 50% of all global sales. 6 cities in China account for almost a fifth of all of the global sales of electric vehicles. And some provinces, regions in China have set very ambitious goals to go to 100% by as soon as 2030. And even places, if you've ever visited Shenzhen, which we did recently, and saw the fact that they've already converted 100% of their buses, nearly 100% of their taxis, nearly 15% of all their commercial delivery vehicles. And so I think we're already seeing, as was quoted in the program, William Gibson, the science fiction author, the future is already here. It's not just evenly distributed. And so we have a few people from the future that will tell us what that's like. And it's not just the public sector. The private sector is stepping up too. You have over 30 companies, major multinational companies that have gone, say they're going to go to 100% by 2030. And then automakers are now really putting in serious money. By our count, over $300 billion of pledged investments over the next several years. So the question is, are we at a tipping point? Are we approaching the top of that mountain? And are we witnessing the beginning of the end of the ice age, the internal combustion engine? And when I started in this role a few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, the idea that we could shift our global road transportation system to zero emissions seemed like an impossibility, or at least implausible. And now more and more people are saying, oh, well, that's going to be inevitable, right? I think it's probably neither, but I think it is within reach. So I'd like to now invite my panelists to make their way to the stage here for the conversation. And I'll introduce them as they arrive. So we have Dr. Professor Dan Sperling, who's the Distinguished Professor and Director of the Institute of Transportation Studies at the University of California, Davis. Come on up. He also he wears multiple hats. I'm not sure what, he's also a board member for the California Air Resources Board, which is the primary agency implementing California's clean car programs, and is, of course, international leader in that space. He also was my thesis advisor when I first embarked on this path. We have Jinhua Chen, who is a program officer with the Energy Foundation China in their Beijing office and oversees work on clean transportation over here. EF China is one of our core partners in that region. Welcome. We have Espen Huaj, who is the president of AVER, the European Association for Electric Mobility. Espen's headquarters is in Norway. So we have somebody from the largest EV market in the world and the country that has the largest percentage of EV sales. And then finally we have Andrea Pratt, who is the Climate and Transportation Policy Advisor from the City of Seattle, one of the signatories to that commitment that I'd mentioned. Please join me in welcoming all of them. Okay. So we're going to just go ahead and get right to it. What I'd like to hear you is basically give kind of a very quick introduction into what your organization is doing, and you can pick between the two in terms of advancing us along that path towards 100% zero-emission vehicles. And then I want you to think about this road that we're traveling to that top of that mountain, and maybe pick out what you see as the biggest remaining roadblock. So one potential big remaining roadblock that you see that we're going to have to overcome. And then one or two sort of signposts that tell us that we're actually on the right path, that we haven't taken a wrong turn. Apple Maps sent us, to some other mountain somewhere. And let's start with you, Dan, and we'll just go down the line.
Well, thank you. So I'm going to start with backing up a little bit, because Anthony and I were looking at the history of these EBS conferences, and we're thinking historically. And I remembered I wrote a book in 1995 about electric vehicles, and I was very enthusiastic, very positive then. That was 24 years ago. And so it does give a little pause. It was 1990 that the California Air Resources Board adopted the zero-emission vehicle mandate that was to require 10% electric vehicles by 2003. So it is good to have these goals and aspirations, and I'm actually very confident that we will achieve them. Maybe not exactly the dates we're talking about, but we are. at least for light-duty vehicles. And I think part of this discussion is, how much are we talking about heavy-duty vehicles? And there's even a lot of money going into small electric planes. So electrification is actually much bigger than our cars. Okay, so when is this going to happen? Well, of course, with my California hat on, we have a mandate that says something close to 15% of sales would be electric in 2025. And I also should back up again also in saying what we're talking about is not just battery electric, but obviously plug-in hybrid and also fuel cell electric. And I'm kind of agnostic. I think they're all great and they all have a role. So are we going to get there to these 45%, 50%, 100% goals? Absolutely. Are we going to get there as soon as a lot of these aspirational goals say? Well, hopefully. But we have a long ways to go, and I'm going to be more positive as we go along here, but I do want to inject a little realism also. The battery costs are coming down, but when we start talking about SUVs, even large cars, pickups, it's going to be a lot harder. And whether those are going to be plug-in hybrids and exactly what kind of plug-in hybrid or fuel cells. So the big challenge here now, I think, is creating the incentives. So this is part of what Anthony just asked me. I think getting the incentive money out there and doing it in a way that's not coming out of general revenue, general taxes, is key. And I'll just give one little example, but there's others. In California, we have the low carbon fuel standard, and we're taking the credits that go to electric utilities for the electricity they sell to electric vehicles, and we're packaging that, aggregating that, and we'll be giving that back to buyers, and that'll be about $2,000 per car. So this is an example. We've got to get creative. Fee baits is another idea, and vehicle-to-grid charging, perhaps, where people can get money for making their vehicles available. So we need to come up with these revenue streams, and that's kind of one of the big idea on what's needed. And it's not just straight policy either.
Great. So I do want to come back, and we'll dig in a little bit more into some of the key enabling policies to get us over that mountain. So let's go to Andrea. So cities are really stepping up here. They're expressing a level of ambition that I think a couple years ago would have seemed inconceivable. So why the increased optimism that you guys can get to these bold goals?
Well, in Seattle, the future is electric, and as our sponsor of the session said, the future is now. So Seattle has made a bold commitment to be carbon neutral by 2050. And roughly 2/3 of our emissions come from the transportation sector. Our consumer-owned utility, Seattle City Light, is actually a carbon neutral utility, one of the few or only in the nation. So anything we electrify in Seattle is 100% carbon reduction and zero tailpipe emissions, which is pretty amazing. So at the city, I manage Drive Clean Seattle, which is our citywide transportation electrification initiative. We certainly don't do this alone and rely on our partner departments like Seattle City Light and SDOT and Office of Economic Development to kind of get us there. But basically, we are trying to electrify anything that moves people, goods, and services in our city. And I'm going to keep coming back to those 3 buckets because I think that's really important. And kind of getting at your question, Anthony, what does the road to zero emission vehicles look like? We really have to take a systems approach. And I'm going to be honest, I feel like we have been very focused on the people moving part, which is very important. It's a large section of the pie. But what about goods movement? What about services movement? Plumbers don't take the bus. In the day of Amazon Prime Now package deliveries, how do cities, work with these companies because, to your point, it's not all about policy. It's not all about incentives. We need corporate leadership. There's a lot of different aspects here, and I'll get into that a little bit more. But thank you for letting us be here, and excited to share your lunch hour with you.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrea. All right, Espen, you've been at this for a while as well. Give us a little bit about what Avera is doing and sort of what you see in this road to the top.
Okay, so I have two roles. I'm representing the Norwegian EV Association, also, which has 75,000 members, very enthusiastic EV drivers that want to share their experience and help support this going forward. And Norway is a country which we say is about 5 years ahead of the rest of the world, with market shares now of, in the capital, Oslo, 80% of the new cars sold are pure battery electric. And that's nationwide in Norway, that's 50%. So we are a step ahead. My other role is in Avera, where we try to bring all together from industry, from academia, from policymakers and the drivers, and to come up, help have good policies around, and there's many ways of doing that. But I think the main thing that we really look forward to is to have price parity with EVs and gas vehicles. And until we have that, we have to work hard with all the policies and incentives and perks. And imagination is the only limit, I would say, to that. An important message, I think, for me is that we're actually going to do this. It's possible, and that we see, especially in Oslo, that it's possible. And it's a task like climbing a mountain, I have another example of a very, very brave Minister of Health who decided to ban smoking in restaurants in Norway, and we all started wondering, okay, who will be the next Minister of Health? But he carried through, and after less than a year, everyone was extremely happy about this decision. And we were thinking, why didn't we do that before? So looking back, yes, of course that was an easy decision, but looking at it from the bottom, it was very brave to go in that direction.
Great, thanks. So just I want to highlight two numbers there. So you said 80% of the market in Oslo, 50% of the market nationally.
That's the newest numbers now.
Yeah. Okay. So as we said, the future is already here. It just happens to be in Norway and China.
And Seattle.
And well, soon, yeah, we'll go Seattle. A little love there too. So Junhwa, tell us a little bit about sort of what your organization's doing and the experience in China. Looking forward to reaching that milestone.
Okay. Thanks, Anthony. Hello, everyone. Sorry, because of the time difference, I'm still suffering the jet lag, so I need some tips through my iPhone. Sorry. It's a great honor for me to have the opportunity to share some information about the ZEV development in China. And I'm working for the China Transportation Program of Energy Foundation China. And the Energy Foundation China is an international non-government organization headquartered in San Francisco. And we have been in China for 20 years. And we always support the researches for the China's policy development. And for the transportation program, we supported some key researches. For example, the China ZEV mandate policy launchment, and we have input some experience from the U.S. ZEV mandate into the policy researches. And the China ZEV mandate has been launched in the September of 2017 and has taken effect in April of 2018. And for the 100% ZEV issues, there is not a national strategy or policies to raise such a target or the roadmap nowadays in China. But the current policies related to the EV development, including the fiscal incentive policies, also the non-fiscal incentive policies. For example, the EV purchasing subsidies is one of the main promotion policies for the China EV development, which will be phased out completely after 2020. And the ZEV mandate of China will play a main role for the EV development promotion in China. And on the other hand, there is a main trend, or called the main driving force from the air pollution control side. That means the Chinese government put the air pollution control in a very high priority of the nation development. Last year, the Ministry of Ecology and Environment of China has launched the Blue Sky Protection Action Plan. In this policy, in this action plan, requirements about the electric vehicle development in the public vehicle fields has been announced, and in some key cities in the very polluted regions in China, the buses has been required to be electrified 100%. And another example could be the Hainan province. The Hainan province has officially announced a clean energy vehicle development plan. In this policy, a very clear target of banning the sales of fossil fuel vehicles by 2030 has been announced. As mentioned by Anthony, Shenzhen city, a very young but developed cities in southern China, has electrified almost all its buses and taxis into the EVs, and they also have a plan to electrify their urban delivery trucks into the electric vehicles in the near future. So for the 100% ZEV issues, someone has said that know about the trend of the future is not so difficult, but know how and when is quite difficult. I'm a common man, so it's also very difficult for me. But we have supported some researches on these issues. The results showed that maybe the cost of the battery electric vehicles will be equal to the inner combustion engine vehicles by around 2030 in China. And also we have recommended some ways to promote the 100 ZEV in China. For example, we recommended to divide the different regions in China into 4 groups with different development priorities of electric vehicles. The very developed regions such as Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen has the highest priorities, and also the prior segment of the vehicles such as buses, such as official vehicles, taxis, could be maybe the first group to be electrified. That's thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jinhua. So actually, I'm going to try a little bit more audience participation here to bring you back into the conversation. So this is sort of a very unscientific Delphi survey. Get a little crowdsourcing here on predictions. Sometimes I find people find it hard to sort of grok the 100% mark, and especially if you think about S-curve adoption, sometimes getting from 90 to 100 can also be a very long road. So let's be a little bit more modest in our ambitions, and I want to get a sense of the room. So what year do you think that we'll hit 50% of new vehicle sales as zero-emission vehicles? 50%. And so let's start with light duty. so passenger vehicles. How many people think that it will be by or before 2050? So that's 30 years from now. Okay, 50%. All right, how about before 2040? Okay, we got the audience. Okay, by or before 2030? Okay. All right, I'm going to try one more here. Let's try buses. Actually, I'm going to come back to when do you think, what year will buses achieve a 50% market share globally? And there's a recent article on this from Bloomberg where they include their forecast for this.
Sure. Can I give the California rules and that?
Sure.
Context? So in California, we adopted a regulation that by 2029, all new bus purchases will be electric.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, 100% of bus purchases starting in 2029 must be electric. And of course, some cities like Shenzhen are way ahead of us, but it provides a little context, I think, of what is possible and likely. So go ahead with the...
Okay, so maybe, for Seattle, and then if you have any predictions for the globe.
So Seattle, it's pretty easy. We signed on to the Green and Healthy Streets Declaration from C40, which requires all of our transit procurement to be zero emission by 2025. And King County Metro, I don't know if there's anyone here today from King County, but in the absence of state mandates, they have gone out and said, hey, by 2040, all 1,600 of our buses will be zero emission.
Wow.
So beyond the Pacific Northwest, I think it depends. There's a lot of factors involved, and I'm encouraged that transit authorities, particularly outside of the West Coast, have made this be able to pencil out economically. And the more that the economics work out, utilities, no demand charges, the faster it'll roll out.
Great. Espen, in Europe or globally, you're...
I think it's going to be surprisingly soon, because the drivers, this is an area where we already are very close to or at the price parity point, and then just a few years.
And so Jinhua, I'll give you a chance to give the final thought on this. So it was a little bit of a trick question. So if you go and you can probably track down the Bloomberg article. This year is when they predict global sales of buses will be electric in 2019, 50%. But of course, there is one very big reason for that, which is China, of course. And do you know where you're at right now? I think you're at maybe 80%, 70%?
Yeah, about 7% to 80% annually in the 2018 and the 2017. Yeah, quite similar data about the ratio of electric buses to the total bus sales in China annually. But it's hard for me to see when the 100 buses will be electrified in China. But I can see in more than I think 10 key cities, for example, in the very air polluted regions such as the Jing-Jin-Ji, the Yangtze River Delta, and the Pure River Delta, I think 100% electric buses will be achieved by 2020, I think.
By 2020, yeah.
But China is a big country and holds the great diversity between different regions. So maybe in some western of China and in some very cold regions of China, yes, I think it needs long time to electrify all the buses.
Great. So Espen mentioned the issue of cost parity, and Jinhua said they're looking at a potential for 2030 based on the recent research in China for cost parity. ICCT, International Council on Clean Transportation, just published a paper that says that it's going to be likely somewhere in the mid-2020s, depending upon the size and the range of the vehicle. So I think two questions, which is, when we reach price parity, can we all go home and relax? Have we basically, at that point, have we crested the peak, or is there still more left to do that will require government intervention, either in the form of carrots or sticks? So let's start with the regulator here.
Well, there's price parity and price parity. So price parity, are we talking about vehicle purchase price, total cost of ownership, and for which categories of vehicles used in what kinds of ways and how much? So it's way too, so Anthony, that's too simplistic a question for me, the regulator. But the regulator can come up with the rules for how to do it. But I would say that the answer is no, it's not enough. And that's why I've been a big champion of fee-baits because that's a mechanism, for those not familiar. I've been preaching this for years now, but it's going to happen eventually. And that is where people buy gas guzzlers, they pay a fee. Those that buy a very low carbon vehicle or a special electric, they get a rebate. And that means no taxes, no taxes involved. It's revenue neutral. And that creates a permanent incentive. And I think that is going to be key to it, because people, even with price parity, it takes a long time for people to become accustomed to a new technology, a new product, and even especially something like this.
Great. I would agree on that point. So I want to come to you, Andrea, and in terms of the role of cities, and particularly on the, so not on the bus side, but everything else, whether it's commercial vehicles, passenger vehicles. What do you think are the main tools that you have in your tool chest to get to deep penetration, 100% of those applications within Seattle?
Well, I think you have to lead by example, and fleet electrification with your own city vehicles is first and foremost. And in dealing with OEMs, in my previous life, I was the Green Fleet Program Manager for 7 years at the city. And you know what moves markets? Vehicle orders. We can do all the policies and mandates we want, but if the vehicles are not coming off the production line and not economically feasible, that's not going to happen. I just want to give a nod to infrastructure. I think people get really excited about purchasing vehicles and trucks and all of that, and the shiny new things coming off the production line, but if we don't have the infrastructure in place, which is a much longer lead time, and we don't have the utilities on board, we're going to have issues there. And then my final point is market forces alone will not center equity or really deliver on environmental justice issues that we really need to address. And so in terms of cities playing a role, I think we need to force that conversation, underscore that conversation, and really walk the walk when it comes to equity and environmental justice.
Great thought. Yeah, that's worth an applause.
Thank you.
Yeah, because especially, the one nice thing about 100% is that it is an absolute, and so you think about it, this has to work for everybody. This has to be able to provide equitable, affordable mobility, and we should be thinking now about how we chart that path in a way that sustains that equity through the transition.
Can I add one little thing to that equity? I think the reality is most people don't buy new cars. It's about 30% of the population that buys almost all the new cars. So one of the things that I talk about incentives. Really what we need to do is look at the used car market as well. And so I think a really high priority is figuring out how to get some of those incentives applied to the used car market that lower income, disadvantaged communities can get access to more easily.
Definitely. So Espen, you work significantly on the consumer side. One of my favorite quotes from a researcher at UC Davis that has done some sort of deep investigation of consumer awareness on EVs said, depending on how you read it, it can be very depressing. He says, the vast majority of the people, including new car buyers, have never heard of these things. We here in this room, we see a Tesla drive by, we see a billboard for a Nissan Leaf, we see a charger in the Walmart parking lot, all they see is maybe a nice car, a billboard for Nissan, and there's something that won't let me park there, and I have to get diapers for my kid, and I'm late for my meeting. And the evidence suggests that the consumer awareness is still really, really low, except for perhaps in places like Norway. So what's the magic solution there to get us to sort of boost the consumer awareness so that people even recognize that this is an option for their next purchase?
I think I'm also leaning on some research from California. I don't remember exactly, but it was shown at EVS some years ago. A plot of where the electric car buyers were living, and they plotted it year by year, and it was like small flowers blooming because you saw it spreading from neighbor to neighbor, and we call it the neighbor effect. So this is how we get started, and we're still there in Norway with this large share of the market that it's still an important effect. Every EV owner inspires around, on average, 3 others to buy an EV. So this is how to get started. But then, at a certain point, we have come up with a new term of what happened in Norway. The market has flipped, and we call it a collective shift of mindset.
Say that one more time.
A collective shift of mindset.
Connective shift of mindset. Okay.
So suddenly, it's not about questioning, will the EV be possible to sell when I want to replace it? This is a question of the diesel car buyers. Will I be able to sell a diesel car in 3 years? So this is changing the picture. But of course, you also asked about how do we get to 100%, and can we go home when we get close to this price parity? No, not at all, because there's new users that have to learn how to use a different technology. And the new technology, the EV, is simpler, it's better, it's more convenient, but you have to get used to it and you have to get into it. So awareness, why we do this, and also how you use it. We have a lot of questions coming. Can I put my EV in a car wash? How do I plug it in for fast charging? You know, these are questions that the new users of EVs will have in many years coming.
So one of the other quotes from the same researcher is paraphrased. He says, you know, we come up with all these reasons why people don't buy EVs, like range anxiety. He says if somebody uses that term, they're in the elite 5% who've actually studied this issue, and you know, you've already got them. They're now in the room. You can have a conversation with them. Most people have, you know, they don't even know yet that they're supposed to be anxious about something. So part of what's embedded in that question, though, is a sort of a presumption of the current model of ownership. So I'm going to bring the audience back in here for another Delphi survey. So how many people currently own a car? Own a car, any car, doesn't have to be an EV. Okay, how many people own an EV? Okay, how many people think that their kid or grandkid will own a car in 2050? Okay, very few. So I'm going to start down there, but I'll come back to you, Dan, on this question. But so in China, Didi, which is for those of you who haven't, it's sort of the equivalent of the Uber, Lyft ride-sharing platform. They've claimed, I think, 400 million users. They also claim somewhere between 250 and 400,000 electric vehicles that are already on their platform. So maybe starting in China, which hasn't yet fully adopted sort of the automobility paradigm of the West, what do you see the role of these ride-hailing companies in accelerating the adoption of electric vehicles into their managed fleets?
Good question, but very difficult to give you an exact answer. Yes, Didi company has supplied a very good platform for the car sharing in China, and also they also have some plans to adopt the autonomous drivings on their platform. But sorry, I don't know some data from the DD platform about the autonomous drivings to promote the electric vehicle deployment. But I could share some other data about the DD platform. And by the end of last year, I think there are totally more than, let me see, at least 400,000 electric vehicles operated on DD platform. And we have discussed with the research fellows in DD company, and they told us that there are not some special regulations or policies for the electric vehicle drivers to join the DD platform, but the electric vehicles increased very fast on that platform. They think the reason could be the cheaper operational cost of the electric vehicles. So I think such companies like DD and the business mode just like them, I think it is really could promote the electric vehicle deployment, especially in the urban areas.
Great. And then I am just going to note, if you do want to ask a question, I think this is working. If you go to your app on your phone and you click on this session, you can go to the Q&A and you can enter in a question, and I presume it'll show up on the feed here. So Dan, you just recently wrote a book, Three Revolutions, about the three revolutions of potential shared electric and autonomous vehicles and what they might mean for the future of mobility. How do you see these things interplaying, and when are the advent of shared and autonomous likely to become material for the transition to electric?
Well, the future of Lyft and Uber is automation, and electrification is absolutely key to them being sustainable. So we are going to be seeing more and more of these vehicles as they get automated. When they get automated, they're really cheap. And if you make them pooled with multiple riders and electric, they actually are a very cheap form of service. And as all of you said out there, I was very impressed actually that you don't think we're going to own cars, because in fact the sustainable transportation future is one where cars are owned by mobility service companies or agencies, organizations. And that means we're not going to own vehicles in the future, and we're going to share rides. And that is going to be economically great, environmentally great, and equity great, because it gives access to a lot more people. But electrification is key to that. And the good news is the car companies, they know that. General Motors, which is moving in this direction, is basing their automated shared vehicle platform on the Bolt. And so I think we're not swimming upstream on this one. It makes sense to the companies, makes sense to the consumers, and it comes back to creating these incentives as well to make. So I'll just say one more thing. In California, we had a law last year passed that requires a schedule for converting all of these Lyft and Uber type cars to be electric. And so we'll be coming out soon with specific regulations and specific incentives to make sure that the vehicles will become electric even faster than others, and that they'll be shared pooled rides as well. And so everyone from other states really, so here's two ideas I've given. One is the fee-bait idea, go back to your states and figure out how to do that. And the other is this, what we call clean mile standard for the Uber and Lyft type companies.
Great idea. So we're getting some, and if others want to weigh in on that one, I'm happy, but we're getting a few questions coming in. We got about 10 more minutes. So there's a few questions on the upstream emissions associated with electric vehicles, and particularly focused on China. The last I looked, an EV in China is still cleaner than a combustion vehicle in China by maybe 10% or so. And so the question is, maybe if you want to say a little bit more about how can we ensure that EVs actually deliver on the promise of low carbon and clean air, particularly as we see an evolution in China's grid. And how do we get these things to work together so that we deliver the outcome that we want on climate in particular?
Just to make it clear, you mean the relationship between the EV and the air pollution? No.
So thinking about the life cycle emissions from power generation to charging an EV, so how do we minimize that? How do we reduce that over time? And are there ways in which China is looking at how to use vehicles as grid resources? Are there ways in which to kind of accelerate the decarbonization of China's grid with the use of electrification?
Oh, wow, good question. and the air pollution in some big cities in China now is a very big issue for the city governors, and I think the background is how to say it in English, is the transportation structure optimization, maybe something like that. And I think an electric vehicle will be one of the measures in that structure or in that framework. But the infrastructure construction is another one barrier for many Chinese cities, especially in this point. They are facing some different technology choices, such as the electric vehicles and also some hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. But in terms of the zero-emission vehicles, I think both of them are not bad choices. I think they are both good choices for the Chinese cities. If we back to the air pollution issues, I think it will be a main driving force for the electric vehicle deployment in China in the next stage, because of the purchasing subsidy will be completely phased out after 2020, and there are some new targets of the city development, especially for the air quality, higher air qualities. So I have mentioned that the Hainan province has officially launched their clean energy vehicle development plan. And in that plan, the main target, one of the main targets is the air quality. It's a very great, very high air quality target by 2030. So along with this target, the electric or the clean energy vehicles would be a very rational choice for them.
Great.
I hope I answered your questions. Sorry about that.
Thank you. That's great. And Espen, I think you had a quick follow-on to that.
Yes, this is one of my favorite topics, and I'm going to touch upon it also in my lightning talk later. But I think, of course, we need to clean up the power production. That, in any case. That said, if you have an EV running on coal power, the coal power plant is still responsible for the emission, not the EV. Because if it's the EV, that means the coal power plant is suddenly clean. So you can't count it twice, just because you use it for transportation. The thing with this is very important also because we need to maintain the reason why we want EVs is to reduce emissions, and then people shouldn't doubt that this is a good solution. But the problem is, in our minds, we tend to remember what we were told a long time ago. So when we were told in 2012 that half of the power production in the UK comes from coal, then we remember that, and we fail to keep updated with today's numbers, which is there's almost no coal on the electricity production in the UK right now. So it's, presenting those facts and keeping up to date with the information is really important.
Yeah, I think it's probably important to note that, I mean, based on studies that we've sponsored and others, that almost everywhere in the world, with a few exceptions, EVs are cleaner today than a comparable combustion vehicle. If you're plugging directly into a coal plant, that's probably not the case, but in most cases, EVs are cleaner. And if you look at our world, sort of where the money's being spent on decarbonization, it's vastly in the power sector. So there's a much, much bigger level of investment that's going into decarbonizing the grid. And if you think about the time frames that are involved here, we have to have these things kind of proceeding in parallel. And you know, it's other folks have says EVs are one of the few cars you can buy where you can be pretty confident that it's going to get cleaner every single day you drive as we clean up the grid. We only have a few more minutes here. I want to now take this conversation to, we've been talking about cars, a little bit about trucks and buses. I want to shrink this all the way down to what is arguably one of the most efficient electric modes, which is bikes and scooters. And actually, I'm going to come to you, Andrea, as the first, which is Seattle does have some policies and experience in this space. So just as a matter of reference, so an electric bike and scooter compared to an EV is about 20 times more efficient. It's almost on the order of over 1,000 miles per gallon if you do the numbers. Mostly because you're not having to carry around 4,000 pounds of metal and batteries as you move the 100 kilogram or less body from A to B. So yeah, what is the role for micromobility in Seattle?
Yes, well, Seattle has one of the biggest electric bike shares in the nation. I think we have 20,000 bikes in operation right now. We have some policy under development for scooters, but scooters are not allowed in Seattle quite yet. That will probably soon change. I think it's really important. Seattle's pretty small. It's about 16 miles long, just footprint-wise, and I think bikes and scooters make a lot of sense of getting people around. And actually, beyond people, UPS started a pilot program with an e-trike to move goods delivery. So again, I would encourage everyone to kind of think systems-wide when we're talking about electrification and what are all the options to move people around, but also goods and services. And micromobility it plays a large part of that in Seattle and will continue to play a large part of that.
Go ahead.
Scooters have achieved 100% electrification. Number one success story.
I think I've seen a few kids riding around on the human-powered ones still, but they are now in the minority.
They're zero emission also.
Yeah. This is true. They're all ZEVs. So I think maybe I don't know if you want to say a little more, Dan, about sort of what you see as kind of how much of the market for mobility these services might accommodate. I think in the U.S. at least, it's nearly 50% of all trips are less than 5 miles. Maybe somewhere on the order of 30% less than 2 or 3. So how do we take advantage of this efficient mode? What's the challenge there?
I love those scooters. They're so much fun to ride, and they're so easy. And so I think that the first thing we need to do is we need to think about them in a very different way. If you talk to a mayor or city council, you say scooter, they say clutter, they say danger, and that's wrong. They should think, aha, here is a strategy that moves us forward, it creates choice. The problem is we have our cars and basically no choice. And so if we try to come up with new ideas, people have their cars, and they're not going to switch because they've already invested. So we need to create choice, and then people will be willing to give up one of their cars, maybe two of their cars. And so the principal thing is the idea of these, for policymakers to think about these in a very different way, in a very positive way. And the key to doing that is creating true protected bike paths, bike scooter paths. You know, because 25-year-old guys, they might be okay riding the streets, but the rest of us, not. We need to feel safe. So really, in terms of transportation side of it, cities should be investing much more money in building protected, safe bike paths. And because it turns out scooters and bikes have about the same speed trajectory, so they're very compatible. So bike paths is what I think is by far the most important strategy.
Excellent.
And it's really important for the future of sustainable transportation, because as Anthony just said, such a huge percentage of our trips are short, and now many of them, most of them are taken by car. And we've got to flip that away from being a car to our zero-emission bikes and scooters and walking.
Great. Okay, so we're going to go to the lightning round here to wrap. So I'm just going to ask maybe one or two questions here. So, okay, I'm going to come back to the first audience question that I asked about sort of when do we think we'll hit the 50% mark. And I'm going to ask it a little bit differently. So I want you to imagine you're on the other side of the hill, and you have a choice now. You can talk about passenger cars, urban delivery vehicles, taxis, TNCs, long-haul trucks, buses. I want you to think, okay, what does that future look like? And what is your organization going to do over the next year? And again, you can pick from the two to get to that market, to that 100% endpoint. So pick one of the five and say what you're going to do over the next year. So when we come back here at Roadmap 13, we can check in on you.
Okay, regulator hat, trucks. And we in California already are in the process of adopting mandates, regulations. So I don't normally like mandates, but you need mandates to get things started. So what we are moving towards and what I support is the idea of mandates both on the truck suppliers, but also on the large fleets, and gradually ramping up the requirement that they be electric, and that could be fuel cell, hydrogen. And I would be flexible and say, okay, if you use renewable natural gas, biogas, that's low carbon, I'm okay with that. So, but basically zero or near zero emission. Start with mandates and then gradually add some incentives.
Excellent. I realize I should have explained the rules of lightning round. Short answer. So Andrea, what's Seattle going to do over the next year?
I am really into package delivery. So we're going to designate an area of the city to be zero emission by 2030. When you start thinking about that, every area of the city gets packages. So yes, mandates, but also making sure that we're not leaving vulnerable populations behind, small businesses, independent owner-operators, low to moderate income folks. Anything that we do really needs to be a solution for all, and we'll be scoping that out this year.
Excellent. Espen?
So I'm not sure I got your question, but I think some key points for me is we need to work on spreading the facts, maintaining the facts around life cycle assessment is one big piece. We want to bring together people from industry, from policymakers, from the EV ecosystem, and spread the enthusiasm that we see here and that we see very often to electrify everything. It's not only about cars, but it's also about construction and the heavy duty buses we talked about already, and cars, of course.
All right. Jianhua, you alluded at least to some of the things that are going to happen likely. So the next year in China, what's going to be your focus?
Oh, sorry. In next year, and I think we could, how to say, look ahead about a new roadmap for the electric vehicle development in the medium and long term. This is the first one, and I think the second one is we will try to start and promote the alignment in 3 to 4 pilot cities of the 100% electric vehicle development in China, and we want to promote these things in the next year.
Great. All right, well, so please join me in thanking our itinerant explorer guides. Hopefully you can now see that top of the mountain, and of course all of you are very much involved in that journey as well, so looking forward to continuing it with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. This was fun.